Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. As you age, you're supposed to get wiser, but my experience has been quite different. As I age, I become more confused about the world around me. Compared to who I was 10 years ago, I'm a lot less sure of things, I'm a lot more cautious, I have a lot more questions than I have answers. But there is one thing that I have noticed, and that's a lot of the stereotypes that I grew up with in my childhood that kind of categorize entire groups of people don't really hold up that well anymore. When I was growing up, I had a pretty simplistic view on the Galactic Empire and the people who served within it. This was an organization run by an evil dictator/wizard, and therefore everyone who called themselves an Imperial was evil. This was an empire that blew up Alderaan and punched Baby Yoda in the head. It also didn't help that the Stormtrooper Corps, one of the most visible parts of the empire, consisted of humans wearing full-face helmets, which completely blocked out their individuality. You see, the average Imperial was dehumanized to me, which was a very dangerous thing. There was no longer a person within that suit of armor. He was just another baddie that needed to be destroyed and canceled. When we lose our ability to have empathy for another person, that person no longer is a human being, it becomes a thing. And it's a lot easier to call for violence and death of things rather than living human beings that we can relate to. I believe in this idea that if you truly take the time to know someone, understand why they are and how they got to the place they are now, you'll either have a lot of pity for that individual or deeply rooted appreciation, even affection for who they are. And that's because it's extremely easy for a human to have empathy for another human. We are remarkably similar, and most of our differences are created by the social structures that we live in and not by our innate being. Most of our needs and wants boil down to two things: security and liberty, two very intrinsically human values. Most disagreements in politics stem from a need to make other people realize that your way of life is the correct path to that shared goal of security and liberty. Now, taking that into account, it's not surprising that most Imperials view themselves as not evil, but proud members of a government organization that is bringing peace and prosperity to the galaxy. For a rebel, this might be a complete disconnect based on the things that they have experienced from the Empire, but it's hard to step back and analyze things when you're so closely involved. And so when two sides in society no longer understand why the opposite side believes in what they believe, we lose that shared empathy, and soon we begin to dehumanize each other, which of course leads to war and destruction. And so today I feel like it's extremely important for us to take a look at what it's like to be an Imperial and why many Imperials believe that they weren't fighting for an evil empire, instead they were fighting for a just cause. The last century of the Old Republic's reign was rife with corruption and bureaucratic gridlock. The core worlds were not run efficiently, but rich enough to maintain an acceptable quality of life for its citizens. But the Outer Rim was completely forgotten. Despite the fact that many Outer Rim members of the Galactic Republic paid taxes and tariffs on basic goods, the Republic still did not have the resources to actually give them anything in return for those tax payments. And so these Outer Rim worlds were prey to bandits, pirates, and unidentified xeno threats. Take a look at someone like Admiral Ray Sloan, an outstanding officer who rose to the ranks of the Imperial Navy and became de facto leader of one of the largest Imperial remnant forces after Endor. Ray Sloan was ambitious, but she was also extremely loyal and dedicated to the cause and the Empire. She also had a great appreciation for the men and women who served beneath her, and she tried her best to keep her people happy and alive. She was intelligent and very rational and believed that the Empire could bring peace and stability. And perhaps if more individuals were like her in the Empire, it probably could have happened. Now, Ray Sloan comes from humble beginnings. She was raised in a very poor family in a core world, and she was almost kidnapped as a child by a gang who dealt in spice and slaves. The Empire would later clear out that criminal group, convincing Ray Sloan that they were the answer to so many of the problems created by the Republic. For her, personal liberty and free and fair elections didn't really matter as much as getting rid of the local gangs in her own neighborhood. So one of the major failings of the Old Republic came from its lack of a federal military, which was defunded and banned more than 1,000 years ago. The Old Republic lost its mandate to rule the moment it decided it no longer needed to take care of the security and safety of all of its member states. Now, the Old Republic would eventually try to increase growth in the Outer Rim by creating a free trade zone. They wanted private companies to come in with their capital and develop infrastructure and provide security, which is exactly what happened. But it didn't just stop there overnight. These corporations became essentially fiefdoms in the Outer Rim because they were completely unchecked. They could do basically whatever they wanted out there, whether it was enslaving individuals for their factories, price fixing commodities to make ridiculous profits, or just debt trapping smaller nations into terrible situations. It's kind of like the Chinese Communist Party's One Belt, One Road initiative, except it's headed by private businesses. What also happened very quickly was a shift from manufacturing in the core worlds to the Outer Rim. The old works on Coruscant could no longer compete with the cheap prices of slave labor in the Outer Rim territories. There were also plenty of resource-filled worlds and asteroids that corporations could easily exploit. And so the entire supply chain of many different industries moved outwards towards this new free trade zone. This, unfortunately, would not last for a very long time. Now that prosperity had arrived to the Outer Rim, the Senate followed closely with demands for taxation. They wanted to get their share. Now, the corporations wouldn't go down without a fight, which of course leads to the Clone Wars. Remember, no one knows that Palpatine played both sides of the war. What people do know is that the Republic was royally incompetent in those early years of the war. They were completely caught off guard, and many worlds were lost overnight to the Separatist cause. The Clone Wars was in many ways much more of a conventional war, and therefore much more devastating than compared to the Galactic Civil War. And it wasn't just the Old Republic's Outer Rim policies that were at fault, it was also the perceived weakness of the federal government. And so for individuals like Republic hero Admiral Wolf Yularen, a strong federal military run by a strong federal government was key in preventing another horrific civil war from occurring. Wolf Yularen would actually resign from the Republic Navy and then join the Imperial Security Bureau in order to make sure that stability could be maintained. The alternative, which was being suggested by opposition leaders like Padme Amidala, Bail Organa, and Mon Mothma, was demilitarization and stripping the Chancellor's power. This would have been unacceptable for many in the military establishment. Whether you realize it or not, the average Star Wars fan is bombarded by tons of rebel propaganda. I mean, take a look at the main creators of Star Wars. Whether it's George Lucas or Dave Filoni, these are individuals who openly have shown bias for the rebellion and individuals within the Rebel Alliance. And so in the movies and TV shows, what we get is a sanitized version of what the rebellion really was. As a person who's worked as a documentary cameraman, I've covered more than my fair share of protests and movements. For the most part, the average movement has its ideological leaders like Mon Mothma and Bail Organa. These are elegant individuals who are well practiced in front of the cameras and terrific at conveying their cause's ideas. Then you have heroes like Luke Skywalker and Leia Organa. They represent the face of the movement and inspire others to join. But the other 99% of a movement is generally made up of a huge mess of random people, many of whom are not exactly functional or contributing members of society. As a matter of fact, before the Battle of Scarif, the Alliance that restored the Republic was just a loose coalition of individual rebel groups. Many of these groups could be categorized as criminal organizations, bandits, smugglers, and terrorists. Saw Gerrera's partisans were amongst some of the most ruthless fighters in the war. They carried out attacks that killed not only Imperial soldiers, but also non-combatants and civilians. Alexander Kallus was an agent for the ISB. On his first mission, he had led a platoon of stormtroopers on a routine patrol on the planet of Onderon. He was ambushed by a Lasat mercenary who was working on behalf of Saw Gerrera's partisans. Kallus was knocked out, and when he was reawoken, he was forced to watch every member of his squad get brutally murdered. This event would harden Agent Kallus and convince them that every rebel he saw was just like Saw Gerrera. Kallus would go on to orchestrate the fall of Lasan and also was the architect for the massacre and genocide of the Lasat people. The unfortunate truth was most Rebel Alliance military units lacked any type of uniformity, structure, and discipline. And as we all know, a group of armed men without these things just is an armed mob, and very dangerous. During the Mid-Rim offensive and retreat, many Rebel infantry battalions would just recruit random people from the battlefield. The rabble that would volunteer were usually not ideologically invested in the rebellion at all. These were generally just refugees looking for some food, or criminals or recently escaped convicts looking for a way off planet. And so atrocities were committed on both sides of the war. Now I look at America today and I'm generally very worried about how society looks. The Trump supporters and Biden supporters of America now have their own social media, their own news sources, and there's little attempt to understand the other side. The truest believers on both sides have become religious zealots, and they don't have room for any compromise anymore. But one doesn't really have to be a zealot to have stopped and asked ourselves how a friend or a neighbor or even family member could have voted for the other side, Trump or Biden. Now, if you are one of those individuals, I have a mission for you. Go up to that individual who has an opposing view from you and try to really find out why they have that opposing view. I mean, like, really try. Don't be judgmental. Let go of your preconceived notions of your views and just keep an open mind. You'll be surprised about how rational another person can sound if you just give them a chance to do it. Because we need more empathy in this world. We need more nuance and careful thinkers. We need to understand that there are multiple paths to any solution. Because the reality is, Trump and Biden don't really matter. I mean, they're old as hell. They're probably gonna die pretty soon. What does matter is this beautiful country we live in and the institutions that are supposed to protect it. We must preserve it not only for ourselves, but for future generations and the entire world. And that's because I believe the United States has a huge role to play in the future of human evolution. No other country on Earth is like the United States. It's a place where anyone can immigrate to and feel like they actually truly belong. I mean, there are countries in Western Europe that are very progressive that you could become a citizen of, but you'll never truly belong there like you would in the United States. And maybe that's because here in America, we're a nation of immigrants, and no one really has a right to say that this is their ancestral home, and people who do say that are stupid. I mean, having a few generations here doesn't mean anything, unless you're maybe Native American. And that's kind of the beauty of this country. It's not about your ethnicity, it's not about your religion or how you look like, it's about our shared values as human beings. We love liberty, we love our Constitution. It's great, and it's a step forward in evolution. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below. As usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.